Welcome to Dusty Little Wastelanders, written by L.L. Smith, narrated by L.L. Smith. Chapter 11, Defeat. The walls. I stared at them. I returned from McDougal's Manor a damaged individual. I'd cooped up in our room, sitting at the desk in the corner, staring at the spot in the wall where two boards didn't quite meet. The bottom corners were close to touching, but the boards flared away as my eyes rode up to the ceiling. Whoever built this wall hadn't checked their corners. The white paint was flaking off the wood, and the brown oak was showing through. This was a silent corner most of the time, allowing me to dig into my thoughts. Although lately, the mind had blown into an empty chasm. Exploring it took time, but I was figuring my way around it. If I ever needed a change in scenery, I turned my head to the right. My view would shift out of this room's dismal corner and out the window. Sometimes I saw the moon, and sometimes I saw the sun. There wasn't much to see from this position. My field of view was blocked by blue. The outside of the registration tent consumed the view from here. It was soothing to watch the ripples blow through the tent. The wind carried wisps of dust with it, and they'd ride the tent ripples like a skipping stone.
"You can't mope your life away," Donald said.
I kept my focus on the corner, but I couldn't help but hear his words.
"We can form another plan. We'll get Kyle back, but you're letting him down by sulking here."
Donald spoke again. I didn't respond. Didn't even turn to give him my acknowledgement. Donald left, and it was TM's turn. They'd made a sort of routine of this. I wondered how long they'd care. TM climbed onto the desk in front of me, forcing his funny face into mine. His first face had a wiggly tongue hanging out of his mouth. The second one featured blown-up puffy cheeks, which he'd collapse with his palms while exhaling a fart sound. The final face, he'd scrunch his upper lip so that it rubbed against his nose. Then he'd wiggle his whole face around like he's coming at me for a kiss. He about got me with that one a couple times, but I was too determined to wallow in my failures. He'd leave, and I'd be allowed again to stare at this room's corner. I was becoming a resident expert in the formation of this wall. The sun came and went. How many times, I couldn't say. Esther, or K2, would deliver me food every night. Some nights I ate more than others. Nighttime was the only time I was guaranteed a visitor. TM would come in for bed every night, tap me on the shoulder, and then commenced putting himself to sleep. Donald came and went, spending some nights here with TM and me, but most nights elsewhere, with Monica, I assumed. Sleep came and went from this position. It wasn't conducive to rest, so my bouts of sleeping didn't stick around. Sometimes I'd drift off while the sun beamed against me through the window. Other times I'd sleep more acceptable hours into the moon's watchful glow. "Where's Enry Duke?" I woke up some morning to an angry shout coming from down the room. Whoever was looking for me was mighty angry to be heard all the way up here.
"You have no business with Enry,"
I could hear Donald respond.
"I know he came back from McDougal's Manor without my daughter," the man shouted. "I'm here to get my firing pistol and bring her back myself."
"Enry doesn't owe you a damn thing. You better walk out that door while you still can,"
I heard Donald threaten.
"You wastelanders are all the same," the man griped. "I hope his brother drops dead on that plantation and—"
The man was cut short by a thud, and then a quick succession of rapid bangs. I lost count after 7. The dinner crowd had awed over the spectacle, and the sounds had stopped. I didn't need to wonder what happened.
"Now get!"
I heard Donald shout.
"And if you so much as utter another word about Enry or Kyle, here, there, or anywhere, I will end your sorry existence," Donald threatened.
I wondered what Mr. Hopeful would make of those threats. I spent the rest of my day peering into the room's corner. Only this time my mind was more active than usual. I thought about the man's words. They stuck with me well into the night. His words would have ignited me on most any other day, and for the first time in however many days it's been, I stopped and asked why. Why? Why had I let that guy get away with saying something? To speak foul on me was tolerable enough, but speaking ill of Kyle guaranteed a mouthful of fist. So why? Why did his words stick around in my mind but still fail to ignite my fire? It's because I knew better. Despite my pathetic state of self-pity, my mind knew better than to let that comment slide. I knew it'd stick around until I'd flung off this funk, at which point those words would properly rile me up. I stopped thinking when TM and Donald popped in to join me for the night. I assumed they were preparing for bed. I turned to face them. The first out-of-place action for me. "Thank you, Donald," I said. The second out-of-place action.
"For what?"
Donald was too taken back by my actions to process my words. "You stood up to that guy on my behalf, and you defended Kyle's honor when I was unable to," I continued.
"Oh," Donald blushed. "That was nothing. That asshole had it coming."
I probably would have given the pistol back, I stood. but there's a fat chance he'll ever see it again after the comment like that.
Don't feel bad about the gun, Donald asserted. He handed us the biggest difference maker we'll ever see. I thank Lord Hickafu that it wasn't confiscated back at McDougal's manor. He should have known he was never getting that back.
I felt a tug on my pant leg. I looked down to meet the odd sensation. TM looked up to me, waving a sheet of paper in my face. His face begged me to check this shifting paper. I snatched it from TM and glanced over another masterpiece. This artistic expression was a happy one, for starters. Happy in its illustration and the scene it depicted, but all too heart-wrenching for me. I gazed upon the ink lines that formed TM sitting at the table in Esther's bar. He had a grin on his face bigger than I'd ever seen. The drawing was so good I could look to TM and imagine the grin on his own face. I looked back to the picture. He had a fork and a knife in his hands. His grin peered just over a large cake, which, judging by the deep ink shading, I guess was chocolate icing. My mind searched for the last time I had a cake of any kind, but chocolate was even more precious. All these wonderful details and reminders couldn't overshadow the single debilitating detail. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were 6 candles jabbed deep into this cake, each with a fierce flame on top. I knew TM's inked self was just fixing to blow them out. When was this drawn? It wasn't dated. Was it today? Yesterday? Several days past? There is no telling now. I'd missed it. I'd tried to resist my tears. I pulled the paper up against my beating heart and let the tears loose. I got out of my chair, took to the floor, curled up into my sleeping bag, and prepared for a new day. The sun's rays illuminated my eyes. They rays filling me with the intent and seizing the day. I sprang to my feet in a single motion. Tim was still sleeping in bed, but Donald had already gone downstairs for the morning. I aimed to leave this bar. I had no destination, just out. I left our room and came to the stairs. I could feel all the eyes, how they burned with questions. I descended the stairs with deaf ears and blinded sight. I pushed through the breakfast crowd and pounded to the exit. The outdoors hit me like a good scrubbing, something else I'd been in need of. The sky on my skin, a kiss of warmth, the dust in the air, that familiar smell of home. My figurative cleansing urged me for a physical cleansing. Esther's bar was great, but it didn't have any wash stations. There was a barber shop just up the street with a couple of stations. I worked my way to the barber shop. I figured I might as well get my unruly ends trimmed while I was there. I was headed in the direction of McDougal's mansion. I avoided eye contact and kept my tail between my legs. I weaved right and headed into the barber shop. The well-kept barber shop was planked in old wood. The wood lined the floor, walls, and ceiling. Ratty chairs hugged each side of the building. They each faced a reflection glass. Some hung straight, but most were tilted. Old ladies filled the waiting section. Regulars, I'd wager. They looked over me with nosy eyes. Their hair was already made up, and I couldn't imagine what else they wished to do to it. With all the troubles I faced, I felt sick knowing that people could freely toss money at futile beauty treatments. Like painting an old shanty, you can't cover old. The available barber looked over my messy appearance with a troubled glance. His spectacles rested on the edge of his nose, and his mustache curled with a purpose. His beady green dots alerted me to his intentions, but I didn't meet him right off. "I want my ends trimmed, and I want to wash up in one of your tubs," I announced.
"You could use one,"
I heard some hag whisper.
"Who let the slave in?"
Another whispered. The available barber made a jittery approach. "A trim and a bath runs about $7.50 these days. Are you good for it?" The barber informed me with the hopes of scaring me away. I plopped off Betty, reached in her, and pulled out my wallet. I handed the barber a 10, placed my wallet back in Betty, and planted her back on my head. "You can keep the leftovers," I said, leaving the barber the biggest tip of his day, I'd reckon. He took the bill without a second thought and ushered me over to the trimming station. I sat in his chair and peered at myself in the reflection glass. My face had become more sunken by recent situations, my expression reworked since the last time I'd visited it. My skin color had at least somewhat normalized. The extensive time spent inside was good for my burnt patches. They looked like large red freckles on my otherwise white.
Hey there, what's up? LL Smith here. Thank you so much for enjoying my audiobook. I'm going to interrupt you real quick and say, if you get real anxious to hear what happens next and just can't wait till next week, or if you get the urge to just support such a stunning, ruggedly handsome, and awesome independent creator such as myself, I encourage you highly to go follow the link in the description and support the official release. Thank you so much for listening, and let's jump right back into that story.
Tanned flesh. "Your hat, sir?" The barber was offering to remove my white curly-brimmed hat. Betty. I say white only because I know that's the color she was when she was new. She was now a faded, dusty, and dirt-tinted light brown color. I removed Betty myself and sat her beside me. I returned my face to the reflection glass. My dusty mange was revealed in Betty's absence. I hadn't washed it since my attempted rescue, and it had only grown dirtier. I could hear the hens cackling at my reveal. In the reflective glass, I saw the barber covering his disgust with the palm of his hand. "May I suggest you wash up first, sir?" the barber stated. "Yeah," I agreed. "It's too dirty to cut, and you can just say that. Won't hurt me none." "We all go through rough patches, sir," the barber said. "The Lord Hickafoo teaches us not to pass judgment. I'll run you some hot water." The barber left to run the water for the bath. I kept my focus on my disheveled, unfamiliar reflection. I didn't meet the glares of the other patrons. They weren't worth my sight. I dug deep into my face, looking for a boy I'd recognize. Where he'd gone was a secret only the years held.
You look as old as me,
Daddy's carver announced. He wasn't wrong, neither. A washing would do me good. I wanted to look 17 again. I waited around for the barber. I was so out of place I was relieved when he finally did come back. I followed him to the washing station. They were tucked away in the back room. 1 tin tub per room. They had all the fancy soaps and any kind of brush I could want lined up in the caddy beside the tub. The barber had made sure I'd get cleaned up real good. He turned and left, closing the door in his wake. I stripped down once the door clicked and draped my clothes over the door. I buried myself into the warm water, another sensation I'd come to miss. I came up for air and glanced at the water in my tub. It was clouded gray by my grime. Yikes. I was going to get a full use out of this bath. It was already worth the money, but I chose to savor the moment. I lathered up with soap, scrubbed away my scalp's dirt patches with shampooed fingers, and dove under for another rinse. At least now the solid water had bubbles, which was evidence I'd washed. Though my hair needed another round of shampoo, I soaked in the tub for a while, basking in my full reset, not thinking much at all, just being in the moment. There was a subtle knock at the door, which jolted me from my daydream. "Sir," a familiar voice came from the opposite side of the door. "Yeah," I answered. "I took your clothes and washed them for you as a thank you for your most generous tip, sir," the barber said. "Okay, great," I said. "Well, it'd seem as I did so, your 7-day pass fell from your pocket," the barber announced. "One of the patrons found it and reported you to the authorities for having a pass that was 2 days expired, sir." "What?" I rubbed my eyes. "I'm terribly sorry, sir," the barber continued, "but the law is here to collect you now." "Can I have my clothes?" I asked. "I'm afraid they're still hanging out to dry, sir," the barber said. "I have a towel for you, but the officer's insisting you leave with him once you're decent." "You do me a favor, barber?" "What is it, sir?" "Can you get my hat, please?" I asked. "Yes, of course, sir," the barber agreed. I stood from the tub and dried off with the towel provided to me. The warm weather maintained my temperature after getting out of the warm water. I dried out nicely and tied the towel around my valuable parts. It was around that time that I saw Betty traveling through the top of the station door. I grabbed her and pulled her through to the other side. I turned her upside down and checked inside the hat. My cash wad of savings was still safely fixed within. I wrapped my fingers around it, didn't seem to have lost $1. I plopped old Betty back on my head and sauntered into the saloon, rocking my birthday suit and an old hat and a moist towel. I felt the hens' eyes. Some laughed, most gawked. I couldn't help but feel as though this had been planned for their amusement. Either way, I owned the situation with a look over here baby smile and the occasional wink and click. I had them all swooning except for the officer who'd come to collect me. He stood stern and cross-armed. He was a human tree, brown as bark and burly too. He towered at 6.5 feet at least. "Look, officer," I started. "This is just a simple mistake. I lost track of time." I took off my hat and reached into it for my wad of cash. The officer flinched and reached for his baton. I let loose 6 tens from the roll. That was over half my total savings. I waved them at the officer, hoping to avoid a counteroffer. "Here," I offered. "60 should be more than enough to cover my expenses, right?"
Turn around and keep your hands at your back, the officer instructed.
"Serious?" I asked.
"I won't ask again, but I'd rather not wallop a naked man," the officer said.
I returned the cash to its wad, placed the hat back on my head, and turned to keep my hands at my back. The officer came up behind me, tied up my hands, and turned me to face the exit. He shoved me through the barbershop door and a couple of shanties down to the jail. I walked barefoot through the dusty streets on my freshly cleaned feet. What a waste. Probably should have asked the barber for my boots, too. We turned off the street and into the jail. At least it was empty. I hated sharing cells with other crazies, but being nude in a cell with other crazies would stand to create a new slew of problems. The officer jammed his key into the lock, pried the rusty gated door open, and shoved me inside. He slammed the door behind me, and I was once again left alone with my thoughts. At least this time I had a new corner to observe. This was a corner of sheet metal, easily blown away if a tornado ever came through. This metal was painted a soft blue, a nice, common color for the time I'd be stuck in here. I was given ample time to reflect on my reset. I was ready to face the world again. I had to face the world again. After all, I'd just been arrested in the nude. Feels like it's hard to get much lower than that. I had to be there for Kyle. I had to make up for the time lost with TM, and I had to find a way to thank Donald. I was left to rot and reflect for several hours. The officer on duty sat at his desk reading a mystery novel. I was soon fixed on finding out how to get out of here. They couldn't hold me forever. Although I'd heard stories of such things, I'd be missed. Someone would be here for me. But I wouldn't mind getting out of here on my own. Speak of the devil, my savior came breaking through the jail door. The officer leapt from the mystery novel and reached for his baton. He calmed once he met faces with Esther, who had my clean clothes under his arm and a renewed pass in his other hand.
I have Enry's pass for 30 days. You can let him go now, Esther instructed.
Esther, I started up, but I didn't know what to ask.
The barber tipped me off, Esther said with a wink.
The officer growled and snagged the pass from Esther. He looked over it, studying it for forgery, but it was legit. I had no idea how much Esther had paid for a 30-day renewal, but it was just another debt I could add to the things I already owed him. The guard rushed to the cell and opened it up. Esther was close behind him. Esther tossed me my clothes, and I caught them with the red face.
Put on some clothes, Enry, and let's get going,
Esther instructed. I changed behind the shield of a cell door and emerged a refreshed man, ready to once again face this world. Esther and I took our leave under the watchful scowl of the officer on duty. We spilled into the streets, and I followed Esther back to his bar. I'll pay you back for that pass, Esther. I don't want to be any more in your debt than I already am, I insisted.
Stop,
Esther flashed me the palm of his hand.
Pay me back by becoming yourself again. No more shelling up, no more shutting out. When I saw you leaving my bar this morning, I saw progress in your eyes. Don't digress, keep progressing. Like a cock chasing after the hen.
I will, I said. I've learned my lesson in regards to shutting people out. I looked to the floor. I missed TM's birthday.
More importantly, Esther corrected, TM missed you on his birthday.
When was it, by the way? I asked.
3 days ago, Esther answered.
How'd you figure it out? I asked. TM pointed the day out to Donald the other day while we were in town. He'd seen it on a calendar. Those two went into town together? I was stuck on that detail.
Yes, Esther continued, but TM was recognized by some extremists who followed them all the way back to the bar. He was ranting about TM's rightful place in the world. We had to threaten death to get him to leave.
Sheesh, I scoffed. That kid's been through so much.
He has, Esther confirmed. Oh, and that pass of yours?
Esther turned to look me in the eye.
Another expert work of forgery from our sly-handed little TM.
No way, I exclaimed. Did you see that officer's face? He was searching every square inch of that page for forgery. I chuckled. I almost want to go back and shove it in his fat face that he was fooled by a 5-year-old.
6-year-old,
Esther corrected.
But I would love to see that. That guy was a real hoofhead.
End of chapter 11.